So I took a rattle can and sprayed the orbiter white on top, but now I'm going to go back and spray the bottom gray. Any area that's going to have tile decals on it, it's going to be gray, and also the leading edge reinforced carbon area. And then after I do the gray, I'm going to go and spray black here and on the tail, because that's what color that is. You can see all the putty work I've done here. It's got a light coat of primer on it. So let's get going. So here's the orbiter complete with 4 decals. So we're going to start this decals now. Probably take me a couple days. Everything looks good, no real issues. Went in and painted the underside gray so that the decals, which are black, would go right, look right against this gray background versus white. Alright, so the decaling is complete, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that with you and how we're going to proceed forward. I guess the first thing would be talking about perhaps the tiles. And if you remember, when I started talking about doing the bottom with tile decals earlier, I mentioned that I had a couple different companies' tiles. One was from a Leading Edge, which is an out of business company, and their tiles were kind of gray, and then I had some aftermarket decals, kind of garage made decals by a gentleman named Ed Bisconi, and his were black. And as the actual tiles are black on the real Shuttle and faded to gray in some areas because of the heat, I decided to go with those, the black ones. Now, aftermarket decals can kind of be hit and miss. The Leading Edge decals are actually professionally done and are more than likely pretty opaque. But if you get decals that are done by an individual in their home using an inkjet printer, then you've got some potential problems with that. The first problem is that when you put something out on an inkjet, it's usually understood by the printer manufacturer that you're going to print it out on white paper, and that somewhat sets the ink pigmentation. So when you print out stuff on black paper, you don't have the kind of opacity that you would have with a commercial decal, and when you put the decal on the model, that shows. It's not. It's just not as opaque as a commercial decal. Now Ed says to paint a gray background underneath these, and that actually works pretty good, because if this if these decals were applied over white, you're going to get too much contrast with the tiles. Now, the other problem with aftermarket decals done on inkjet printer is they're basically printed on white decal paper or clear decal paper, and then there's a clear coat applied over them. And this clear coat doesn't really stand up very well to decal setting solutions. And in fact, you can end up dissolving the decal setting solution in fairly short order, and then since it's water-based ink, then you end up with your ink running. So you don't have a whole lot of time to work, and that can be problematic, especially with large decal sheets, these wallpaper type decals you see with tiles. So I had some problems. Ed's instructions, I think, called for 2 to 2.5 minutes for them to release in the decal paper. Well, 2.5 minutes is too long. If you're in the water for 2.5 minutes and you pull them out, you're already starting to see the pigmentation on the ink on the decal starting to bleed. So I backed that down to 2 minutes, and that still didn't give me enough time to work, so I ended up backing it down to about 1.5 minutes. And I was pretty religious with that. I'd put the decal in, and I would time it for 1.5 minutes, and then I'd pull it out. Now that would give me about 30 seconds of good working time to get the decal in position. And instructions call for putting microset underneath, and I did that, and that generally worked okay, but not everywhere. So if you have a choice between using commercial decals and aftermarket garage decals, use the commercial ones, because the aftermarket ones are kind of a pain. Now the other thing is the fit. This is the monogram orbiter. The monogram orbiter is not as available as the Revell orbiter worldwide. So the decals appear to be sized for the Revell orbiter. So they just don't fit anywhere on this monogram kit. I had to adjust everywhere, okay? And as a result, you can see where there were some problems. And also, wherever you have seams, if it doesn't fit exactly and there's overlap between with the seam, then you're going to get situations where 2 layers of decal end up being darker than the 1 layer of decal on either side. So all this stuff has to be fixed. This area right here was the area where I'm putting this big decal down right here, this started to dissolve on me. So I had to go back and try to put some additional strip decals on here, tile decals on there. As a result, you can see it's darker. It's not going to make a big difference in the big picture, because this is all going to be tied together with some gray and some streaking and the weathering that we expect to see on the bottom of the shuttles. But all these areas, you can see, this didn't fit, and it took additional, tiles. The good thing is you get additional tiling decals with the set. This didn't fit right here, right here. None of this, none of this, none of this. Now I was very careful with my masking on these leading edges, but again, it's problematic. Okay, so I've got it flipped over now, and these are kit decals, as are these and these. And again, nothing fit. And a couple things I want to point out here. Number one, this is a decal. That was not the original plan. The original plan, I had glass windows in here, and when I was doing my body work, the glass windows became loose, and they're actually rattling around inside right now. I can't get them, but that's the way it goes. But I did have a set of window decals, so I went ahead and put them on. Now this bright blue is not going to cut it, so when I get done with everything here, I'm going to mask these windows off and paint them a dark gray so that they blend in more. There's still glass underneath here, and hopefully I won't knock that out before I'm done, but that should look pretty nice, if it stays intact. I did originally put the aftermarket decal American flag here, which is a little bit smaller and a little bit more accurate in size, but the red ink started to bleed, and so I just took that right off right away. That was pretty frustrating. And some of these tiles you can see along the chines here and along the trailing edge of the wing and the wing flaps and all, there's not gray underneath them, and you can see that the contrast is too great. You can see the white shines through. So I'm going to have to come back a little bit later on with some oils and try to mute this out a little bit so that it's consistent with the gray that is underneath the decals here and on the underside. Alright, so the last thing you're probably going to notice here is all these stencil decals all over the whole airframe. Now these are made by an outfit called Warbird, and I got a couple sets because I didn't know how many I would need. Warbird decal Space Shuttle towel codes, black and white. These are designed for the upper and lower surfaces of the Revell orbiter. So there's white ones, there's black ones. The black ones are useful for us here, but the white ones really aren't. The white ones for the underside tiles are sized for the Revell orbiter, which has oversized raised line tiling in it. You could use it for that if you're that patient. There's thousands of them there, but the white stenciling is too large for these accurate size tiles that we have on here. So I just used the black on the white. Now you can see there's a lot of contrast. In fact, there's too much contrast, and that's a common problem with decals. And if you read references, you will hear, or you will read that they will tell you, well, yeah, there's stenciling on these things, on these thermal blankets, but not on every single thermal blanket because some of it burns off. Yeah, okay, sure, maybe so, but all the pictures I looked at, pretty much there's a stencil on every single one of these thermal blankets, especially around the tail, and a large number of them along the side. Some of them are faded, some of them are burned maybe a little bit, but most thermal blankets have some stenciling on them. But this still doesn't look right. Okay, you can see that there's just too much contrast. The ink on here, or the print on here, is probably a little bit too large in terms of the boldness of the print, but it's the limitations, of what we're trying to do. So the contrast is just too great. So I knew that when I started putting them on. So the plan here is I'm going to put a coat of clear on here. Acrylic, basically it's just Future, and that'll protect all this paint work. And then I'm going to go back and start doing my washes and my special effects type stuff. And one of the things I will do is do a thin spray of flat white over all this as a filter to try to mute this contrast a little bit and bring it kind of all together. Oh, and something else, because the black tile decals don't fit, you have to go in and take some black and touch up everything to bring it all together. Here's the tail end. I don't know how much of that you can see. Let me see. These are the decals you get for the tail, and you can see it doesn't cover everything. In fact, that's way more than you get because I used some extra ones to fill in here and there. But you got to tie all this together, and I'll have to get my airbrush out and with my black and kind of put all this together. I'll show you that later. And I still have to, again, put some black all these little areas where you see white shining through. That's gotta, have some touch-up painted black before we're ready to seal all this up. So still a good bit of work to go, but we're closing in. We're getting there.